while there was engagements on the street with the local law enforcement, they stormed the military base. They took all of the officers' families, put them in their homes, and then wired the homes with explosives. Then they called the general at the base and said, either you release him or we blow up all your families. Made right after 9/11 that the CIA, well, I don't know if they'll acknowledge it, but I spoke with numerous individuals after 9/11, and everyone said they shut down the border to make sure no Arabs got across.
Yes,
there was a dialogue there where they were.
Yeah, there was a dialogue. There was a dialogue, and I believe it was with Sinaloa Cartel.
Yeah,
and it was to ask them to it was some kind of partnership or some kind of agreement with the CIA and the cartel that's been confirmed.
Oh, it has been? Okay, yes. Interesting. Last week there was a big article in the New York Times where they broke the fact that the CIA has been having these drone flights over Mexico.
Yes. That's what my interview was essentially that's what we focused on with her.
What was interesting about that though is, I make it a point of corroborating the information that I learned, and I corroborated through open source material. And so there was a conversation I had a few years ago with one of the cartel guys, and he indicated that they had moved the Fentanyl labs, the main ones, out of Sinaloa. So they had one in Oaxaca, which is way south in Mexico, and then they had another one in Guatemala. And so when I read the New York Times article, and I pulled up other additional articles, one of them had a map of where they're flying over. You're not even flying over the right area. You're in the wrong country. And so, but before I came forward on this, now I jumped on open source material and I started doing research, Fentanyl, Sinaloa, Guatemala, and boom, up pops criminal prosecutions where the Guzman's organization's representative in New York was distributing 1,000 kilos of Fentanyl, and he had 1,000 kilos for distribution, and that the Fentanyl had originated in Guatemala. So this is, I think the value that I bring to the table is I have a deep understanding of the operations, and I'm able to independently take information from open source and put it together in a presentable, digestible manner for people to understand what's actually going on. The conversation about the Guatemala thing was just us talking on the yard while we're walking laps. It didn't become relevant until last week when I saw the article. I'm like, let me see if I can confirm that, because now it triggered the recollection of that discussion. And so, yeah, sure. Here, boom, the largest Sinaloa lab for Fentanyl is in Guatemala. And so I'm sure, look, the Navy SEAL that I spoke with last week told me that the intelligence community doesn't have to rely on me to make statements on a podcast. I have no doubt that they know. The FBI. So when they tell us that they're operating in Mexico, you can rest assured they're in Guatemala. They're in Honduras. Because this is information that's known to the FBI. It's known to the DEA because it's appearing in federal indictments. So unless there's just a massive breakdown in communication between our law enforcement agencies, I have no doubt that the depth of the CIA's involvement is at a much deeper level. The information that got disclosed in those leaks, our government has the names of every one of those officers. There's literally lists of officers that are dirty, identifying the amount of money they're getting paid and which organization and which cartel was paying. Well, that's the kind of leverage that we could use. We can let the Mexican authorities know, hey, look, we're prepared to indict these 700 officers. Get your people in line. Because the goal ultimately is to stop the Fentanyl.
Yeah.
And so long as that's the goal, you need leverage. Not leverage over the criminals. They're criminals. You need leverage over the individuals providing the protection that allows those structures to operate. I previously sent you one of those schematics. This is the Sinaloa cartel. It's 44 organizations. This is as of last year. It's 44 organizations spanning 15 states. There are no comparable structures in the United States, because law enforcement would break something up like that in a minute. They're only able to operate in Mexico because they got the tacit approval of elements of the Mexican government in certain circumstances, and in other circumstances, they got express approval. While there was engagements on the street with the local law enforcement, they stormed the military base. They took all of the officers' families, put them in their homes, and then wired the homes with explosives. Then they called the general at the base and said, either you release him or we blow up all your families. So they'd already identified who all the officers are, where they lived, and had a prearranged plan. So that means these are tactics. They didn't develop this on the fly. This is pre-planned. In the event one of the big guys get arrested, this is what you're going to do. 1, 2, 3. Well, that's where the Americans get involved. They come up with the plans and they're executed by the military wings. You know, they're soldiers. That's essentially, you know, the big boys aren't. The colonels aren't in the middle of the gunfight. They're in the back.
Yeah. I've had some intel saying that there is Ukrainian military as well in Mexico teaching them drone warfare. Any have you ever heard anything about that?
No. The only group I know of are Israelis, and that's very limited. I mean, you heard a little bit about Israelis, but no, not Ukrainians. I haven't heard anything like that. You know, there's a few years ago, there was a big leak. Essentially, it's like the Spanish language version of WikiLeaks. It's called the Guayacama leaks. And it showed, you know, like a large number of terabytes of data from the Mexican Defense Department. And it literally has over 4 million emails where, you know, generals are communicating with generals and colonels with colonels and openly discussing the fact weapons are getting sold to the cartels. They're comparing numbers on bribes, like how much are you getting? Well, the guy in Oaxaca's getting $500 a year. Well, the guy in Guadalajara's got to get a lot more than the guy in Oaxaca. So when he goes to renegotiate his new contract, he says, hey, the guy in Oaxaca's getting $500, I want $750. And so we've got a really good insight into the depth of corruption within the Mexican military, but there hasn't really been any discussion about foreign nationals in the sense of Ukrainians coming in. Now, granted, the information is from 2023, so it could be more recent, but no, I haven't heard anything either through discussions with cartel guys or through any of the open source material I've been able to review.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating how fast they've become very knowledgeable using drones and how effective they've been recently through some of the videos that I've been able to see.
Well, the drones for smuggling purposes, that's common. That's common. One of the guys, one of the CJ&G guys that I was, you know, bullshitting with one day, he said they've got so many drones flying back and forth, just like the air pattern over LAX. I mean, it's just all night drones going. And so, you know, but the economics of the narco world have changed with the introduction of the synthetic, you know, the Fentanyl. I don't want to say the word. Because for the first time, small amounts, 2 kilos, 3 kilos, represent hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, I was in the system for 23 years before I met my first backpacker. Before that, I always look at it from the economics perspective. How much can a backpacker bring? Let's say he's bringing in 5 kilos. You're going to pay him $1,000 a key? Well, why is somebody going to risk 10 years for $5,000? The 10-year mandatory minimum. And you can give the same product to the local cartel rep. They'll smuggle it for you for the same $1,000, and they insure your product. Who's going to turn down the insurance? So it wasn't an economically viable business model to have backpacking up until the introduction of the synthetics. Because now it takes $3,400 to produce the same amount of material, 2 or 3 keys. For 2 kilos, you're going to sell them for $300,000 in Phoenix. So there's a profit margin at this point. So it would be impactful because the backpackers are actually working behind the backs of the cartels. The local mom and pop producers, they're not supposed to be doing this. They're supposed to be selling it to the cartel group. They're going behind their back. That's why they can't give it to them, because they'll pay a much cheaper price in Mexico. They'll pay 60 cents a dose, as opposed to the American that'll pay $3 to $6 a dose in Phoenix.
We've seen the numbers of smuggling. Well, I'll say this: we've seen the numbers of illegal immigration go significantly down I'm curious to your experience. Do you believe that also has affected drug trade?
No.
Why is that?
Well, because you've got multiple redundant systems that are based on, you look at the highly publicized photographs, Mexican troops, 10,000 troops on the border. Yeah, well, none of them are anywhere near a tunnel. Just going right underneath it. They're not searching every tractor trailer coming through. You got 15,000 trucks coming through every day. You've got a truck with 12,000 pounds full of lettuce in the back. Are they going through every crate? That's all show. Of course, it does nothing for the large operations, the guys that could afford to spend $20, $25 million setting up an importation cell in Tijuana. The mom and pop guys have to do the backpacking. Those are potentially going to get subjected to interceptions because now you got a lot more boots on the ground. You build a wall, you knock those people out.